This on BBC World News.
Hey, good morning America, evening Asia, hello world. Welcome to a very shortened version of Talking Business with me, Aaron Heslehurst. Let's get cracking because the US economy has delivered those all-important jobs numbers. Take a look. In the last hour, we've been told that the US added a lower than expected 157,000 jobs for the month of July. Now, it does mean that the unemployment rate is now down, pinched down or edged down, 3.9%, which economists certainly regard as a sign of how well the economy is doing. However, there are questions about how sustainable that is. Also questions about how sustainable is that growth rate that we saw, 4.1% for the past 3 months, which we got last Friday. Now, one of the major reasons why that is could be affected is the impact of tariffs on the imports from China. It's yet to be fully felt. And just on Wednesday this week, we talked about it. President Trump threatened tariffs on another $200 billion of goods. Okay, let's get rid of the cube. Okay, Jay Shambaugh is waiting for us. Jay Shambaugh, former economic advisor, of course, to President Obama and is a director at the Hamilton projects at the Brookings Institution in Washington and a familiar face. Jay, good to have you with us. Hey, listen, not quite the number we're expecting, but I believe you think it's not a problem. But if you look at the picture, employment was added across pretty much many sectors in your economy. You've got that 4.1% growth rate. More people are finding jobs. I mean, can we say that President Trump has that economy firing on all cylinders?
Well, I think what I would say is that the economy has been continuing strong trends it's been on, honestly, for about 5 or 6 or 7 years. The job growth was, as you mentioned, a little below expectations, but that's not really anything to worry about. It's been going over 200,000 jobs a month on average for the last 3 months or the last 6 months or really the last year, and those are terrific numbers. You mentioned the 4.1% GDP growth rate. That I wouldn't put too much stock in. GDP growth bounces around quite a bit. Over the last year, it's been around 2.8%, which again, that's solid growth, continuing strong trends we've been on. The numbers we're often watching a lot are both wages, which were a little sluggish. They're still right around 2.7%, and that's actually a little below inflation right now. So people aren't seeing kind of a real wage gain at all, which is frustrating for people. And the participation numbers, those are really good to see this month. They ticked up a bit, more people in the labor force, especially in the prime age group, when you kind of take out the demographics. So that's terrific news to see more people working, more people getting jobs. Very
briefly, having near full employment, will that pose a problem going forward, finding the skilled workers to fill the jobs?
Well, you know, we still have a little bit of a ways to go in the prime age group. So the unemployment rate is very low, but we still don't have quite all the workers back in the labor force that we had even in 2008, let alone 2000. So there's still a little bit of room, not a huge amount. You couldn't forecast 3% growth for a decade, but you could have a little bit above trend growth for another year or two as you pull those people back into the labor force. Okay. Whether you have enough skilled workers or not is a question, honestly, whether you train enough of them.
Yeah, indeed. Hey, Jay, can you stay put for us? Because I want to come back to you on our next subject, and that is, of course, we know that the big threat hanging over the US economy is the possible trade war. Well, it's already really a trade war with China. But Beijing, in the last hour or so, has announced another move. Let's go straight over to Blakey, who is at our office in Bureau in New York. Blakey, good to see you. Listen, give us the details, because it's something like, tariffs on some $60 billion, an extra $60 billion worth of American stuff.
Yeah, the word on this is just coming down here in the past hour or so. We're talking about tariffs on 5,200 kinds of items worth about $60 billion US. Now, China is calling this a rational and restrained move in response to the US's own moves in this growing trade dispute. Now, the tariff levels will come in at 5, 10, 20, and 25%. The highest tariffs on things like meat, wheat, wine, liquefied natural gas. They're saying that these are just proposed. They will only come into effect depending on the U.S.'s next move in this growing trade dispute. But you'll remember, Aaron, and as you said at the top of the program, earlier this week, the Trump administration floated the idea that it's considering intensifying its own tariffs to 25% from 10% on that $200 billion worth of goods.
Okay, Blakey, great stuff. Thanks very much for that. Have a great weekend. See you next week. Let's go back to Jay Shambaugh, who is waiting in Washington. So the Chinese say a rational and a restrained response. We're expecting a retaliation, but here's the thing, right, with China, is if President Trump whacks tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese stuff, you don't have $200 billion of stuff that you send to China.
So, no, that's why they're doing a, quote, rational response, is they have to hit a lower number. The thing is, whether it's a lower number or a higher number, it's still a lot, right? So $200 billion of exports from China to the U.S. with tariffs would be a huge hit. It would be really disruptive to a lot of firms in the U.S. that import inputs from China and then do more manufacturing here. And by the same token, if you've got 60 or plus the other tariffs approaching $100 billion of U.S. exports to China being hit, it's a big deal. That would be a substantial disruption to the economy.
Indeed. Jay Shambaugh, have a wonderful weekend. Thanks for joining us. Okay, that's all the time I have at the moment. The markets are pretty flat on Wall Street. Follow me on Twitter at BBC Hour and have a great weekend. See you next week. Bye-bye.